Welcome to MadHouse-Creations. In this video I'm going to show you guys my process of taking an extra large 3D printed skull, turning it into a silicone mold so we can make some extra large skulls for our Halloween projects. This was my first time making a skull mold with this much detail and at this scale. So there was definitely some lessons learned, stuff we'll go over at the end of the video. So let's get into it and I'll show you guys my process. Alright, so on this 3D model, it was in 3 parts, so I'm just taking some Gorilla Glue, gluing them together, trying to open it up and squeeze as much in there as I can. After it was glued, I took some masking tape just to give it a little extra pressure, hold these together, these 2 halves together. I want to try to get the nicest seam as I can, just to reduce the amount of work on the next few steps. I definitely don't want the seam line showing up in the mold. And once this is done, I let it sit overnight. This is the next day and I'm removing the masking tape and we're going to start working on cleaning up the mold. So I'm just taking a Dremel tool, just hitting that seam line and any extra parts where there were supports attached that just need to be cleaned up a little bit. Here's a little visit from my dogs. She had to see what was going on. Yep, that was it. Once I was done smoothing it out, I'm taking some spot putty. It didn't have any acetone, so I tried mixing it with alcohol. I've never done it this way, and it didn't really work too well. I wouldn't do it again. It was very chunky, but you know, it serves the purpose. It just took more sanding to get it to clean up. But basically the spot putty is going to fill in all the seam lines, the layer lines, and some of the detail. This skull had a lot more detail on the back of the head and these big old cracks that I did not really want in the final product. I focused mostly on the seam line, but I ended up coating the entire skull, trying to fill in as much as I could. This print was actually pretty good. It didn't have a lot of layer lines to it. I think I printed it with a 0.05 layer height. I ran to Home Depot, grabbed some acetone, and now I'm going to start sanding this first layer. I started out just hand sanding. There was a lot of sanding. It took me probably an hour to get all this spot putty off. And then once I had it pretty well sanded, I started on the second coat of spot putty, this time using acetone. So you can definitely see the difference on how well it spreads out. Makes a nice thin layer, and it dries a lot quicker too. So almost by the time you're done with one side of the skull, the other side's already dry. I was just working my way around, gave it a good coat, and I also took some full strength spot putty that it was not reduced and just added it to the really deep spots. And this time when I sanded it, I grabbed my orbital sander just to speed it up and put some, I think it was 400 grit, maybe 200 grit sandpaper. So not very rough, but just made it easier. And just went over the entire skull, really focused on that seam line, trying to get it so it doesn't show at all. And it actually disappeared pretty well, especially with all this texture on this model. So when you coat the entire model like this, the trick is to try and sand off as much as you can. So you're not changing the shape of the model, and whatever's left is just only filling the cracks. It usually takes quite a bit of time to get it pretty detailed, but the more work you do here, it's going to turn out better in the final product in your mold. If you left all the bumps, it would be transferred to your mold, and then it would be in every single cast that you make. So it's worth the time to spend getting it the way you want it. You know, if you were using your silicone mold to make it like a crystal skull or something where it would definitely show up, I would spend even more time, do more coats, and just get it perfect. For my purposes, for the foam skulls, it's not that big of a deal to have a few bumps, and I'm going to paint them all anyways. So here again, I'm just trying out the jaw on there, trying to see how I want to do it. This is some epoxy from Smooth On. It's XTC 30. It is a 2-to-1 mix ratio. Doesn't take a lot. It helps fill in any layer lines. You could even do this before you do spot putty. It would cut your sanding time down quite a bit. If you were making a mold out of something 3D printed and you wanted it glass smooth, this is what you'd want to do to make that perfect mold. You could pour like a crystal skull out of, you know, a clear resin or something. So you just give it a good mix for about a minute, and then once that's all mixed up, I just proceeded to brush it on the mold. I covered the entire mold. This resin, it's pretty thick. It doesn't spread out that easy, but it flattens out. It self-levels, so it really helps filling all the small little pinholes and bumps and cracks and everything. So I just spread it out with a chip brush, just taking my time. On this first coat, I got about half the skull coated, and then I set it aside, let it dry overnight. So the next day, after everything was dry and completely coated, I just grabbed my sander again. This time I used some, this was the 800 grit sandpaper. And all I'm trying to do here is, get out any air bubbles or spots where the brush, the brush hairs got stuck in there. I did go over the entire thing, but I probably could have gotten away with just spot sanding and just finished it off with a little hand sanding to get in the finer details. Give it a good wipe down with some alcohol just to clean it off, get all the dust off it, and then we're going to start on the molding process. In this part, this is where I was gluing the jaw. I was trying to figure out exactly how I wanted the jaw to sit. I ended up wanting the open mouth, so I just took some hot glue and just tacked the jaw open. To make a silicone mold of something like this where you can see through the cheekbones and the mouth, like you wouldn't be able to make a silicone mold without closing those off. Silicone would just stick to itself and lock your object into the mold. What I'm doing here is just taking some aluminum foil and filling the major voids in the model, and then I'm going to use some oil-based clay to seal it off. Started out by filling the eyes and the nose holes just because I didn't want them as deep as they are. They don't need to be. I just cut the size in about half. I think to finish this mold it took about 2 pounds of clay, but I was just going through covering all that foil, covering all the voids in the skull. I didn't want the mouth to completely fill with silicone either, but I really wanted the teeth to show up. So what I did is I just pushed the clay back from the teeth about an inch, and I just worked my way around the skull, filling in the cheekbone area, behind the jaw, pretty much anywhere that I shoved foil in so you don't see the foil. And I took my little carving tools and smoothed out the clay the best that I could. So on this part, I'm just filling the entire jaw underneath, anywhere that's going to have silicone touch it. But I'm starting to build the pore spout or the hole for my silicone, and just trying to judge where I want the pore spout to be. And I just build it up with some clay snakes, try to get it level because I want the skull to sit a certain way on the board. And then once I fill in the rest of the skull, I'll go back and get that exact. So now here, this is where I start to sit it on the board right where I want it. What I do is, once I have that neck built up, I just put it on the board, push it down a little bit, and that way when I pick it up, I can see if there's any gaps and add more clay to it and try to judge where the final point will be that this sits. I didn't like the way it sat, so I added some more clay to the neck just to raise it up off the board a little bit more, and just spent some time smoothing out the clay as much as I could, using a brush just to get any little crumbs and things off it. And once I was happy with that, I just give it a good push down the final time on the board, and this is how it'll sit during the mold. If there's any gaps around the bottom, I just add little pieces of clay just to seal off any holes that might be against the wood. This first layer of silicone that I'm doing is just what was left from last season. I didn't know if I'd even have enough to do one coat on this mold, so I just tried to pour as much as I could out of this bucket, which I ended up getting about probably 6 ounces of each A and B out. So it was enough to at least do the first coat. And then once I was done with this, I jumped on Amazon and ordered some more. When you're mixing the silicone, you always got to make sure you mix it very thorough. You want to scrape the sides of your container, scrape the bottom, and just completely mix it till you do not see any streaks between the different colors. Usually the silicones are different colors, A and B. You want a good consistent mix on this. So just give this a good thorough mix. One thing I like about the Rebound 25 is you don't have to degas it. It does a really good job of degassing itself when you pour it out. I've never had any issues with air bubbles on my molds. So once that's all mixed up, I'm going to start putting the first coat on the skull. I just take it, dump it out on top, and then use the chip brush to spread it around. This first coat's going to be fairly thin. The idea is just to get a good single coat on the entire skull and get into all the little details, make sure there's no spots that are missed. And since this is sitting up off the board, I have to take my time and try and get underneath the jaw, push as much silicone up there as I can, get in between the teeth, behind the teeth, pretty much any little areas in the nose. You just want one nice thin coat covering the whole thing. And typically to make my my keys for my mold, I use these little medicine cups. So I just grabbed 4 little medicine cups and filled them with the remaining silicone I had in the cup, which should give us more than enough keys for this mold. So once I was happy with that, I let it sit. It took a couple of days before Amazon delivered my next batch of silicone, so there's no issues with waiting in between coats. I've never had an issue with waiting in between coats. So this is a few days later. Before doing the next coat of silicone, I go through with a pair of scissors and cut off any little drips or little bits that might be hanging down. You just cut them off and discard them. And on this coat, the second coat, I am going to be adding some Thivex to the silicone, which is a thickener. It will make it so it's not as runny. You can just put it on and it'll stay put. And once that's all mixed up, in this coat, I'm focusing on the deep holes, like the eyes and the mouth. I had to shove a lot of silicone up underneath the skull because of the way I'm make my molds. If you had something that was flat on the surface, you wouldn't have to worry about that. I just use tongue depressors and popsicle sticks and whatever I can to push it underneath and get all the air bubbles out and just try to get a good solid coat. And then I spend some time just smoothing it out the best I can. And on this batch, I'm just focused on filling any of the voids that are still remaining and then adding the keys. The key that I added to the back of the skull, it was a little bit shorter than I wanted and it was a lot thicker, so it was really stiff. I just used a couple of T-pins to hold it in place. Everything else sticks really well. So then I just let this dry, and a few hours later I'm coming back with another coat of unthickened silicone and just pouring it over the entire mold. This just helps smooth out any big bumps, and it also helps lock in those keys. And just trying to build up the thickness of the mold, I added even another layer after this. It's time to build the Plaster bandage shell. These are medical grade plaster bandages. To get these ready, I try to get them all ripped up to the size I want and set aside. I typically shoot for 4 to 8 layers thick around the entire thing, depending on how big the mold is. So once I have everything laid out and ready to go, I just grab a bucket of water. I take my longest ones, dunk them in the water, fold them in half, and squeeze all the water off. And this first one I always put down the center to make sure I get it the mold divided in half. Now the way I make these now, I leave the keys sticking out and I try to pinch the keys going down the center between the two halves of the mold, so you can see how I kind of go around each key. Once I have that in the spot that I want, I come back, rub it in, get that plaster activated and spread out. You just take your time, especially on this first one, making sure you get it right down the middle. And usually the first one's a little hard to get it to stay in where you want it because there's nothing for it to grab onto. It slides off the silicone pretty easily. But this stuff, within a few minutes, it starts warming up and getting hard, which helps a lot with the future bandages. So I'm just grabbing another long one, do the same thing, double it up, and then I put it right on top of that first one I just did. This will give it plenty of thickness. These long bandages were 3 layers thick, and then I fold them in half so that you end up with 12 layers of bandage right along the edge, which makes it really nice and thick and sturdy. So you just stack them on top of each other, make sure they line up pretty well. You don't want the edge where the two halves connect. You want to keep that as clean as possible. And then I just proceed with adding bandages around the entire half of the mold. And I do try to focus on where the keys are sticking up, especially the one on the side of the head. That one takes a lot of abuse, pushing it in and out of the shell all the time. Keep on going until you have the thickness that you want. I also build up the flange around the bottom fairly thick. I try to get 8 to 10 layers on that because that takes a lot of abuse when you're laying your mold down and breaking it open. So this is the next day. Everything's dried. I'm getting the second half of the mold ready, get all my bandages set aside like before. And I also add a coat of Vaseline on top of the first half, about an inch or two into the mold. This will allow the second half to overlap and lock together nicely with the first half and still be able to get them apart. So same thing, just take your longest strips, dunk them in water, rinse them out. And on this very first one, what I try to do is butt it up right against the other one as much as I can and still go around the keys. You can see here is where the keys are going to pinch together in the middle. And always take your time on this first one just to get it lined up as much as possible. So then we just build up all the layers. And again, I'm building up the flange. What I do on this layer is I try to overlap the first half of the mold by a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch. This just gives you a spot where the two halves will lock together. It just helps you line everything up when you take it apart and put it back together. Once that's done and dried, I didn't wait overnight on this one. I just waited just waited a couple hours. Now it's time to take the mold apart, see what we made. This part here, I was having a difficult time getting it off the wood because I forgot to put the Vaseline layer on the wood. What I ended up having to do was pull the shell off and then just stretch the silicone off. It comes off pretty easy when you can just stretch the silicone. Now that I have the silicone off the wood base, now we're going to extract the model from the mold. First thing I do is take a razor blade and cut it open. Here I'm cutting the back. I usually just cut through the flange and then work my way through my little cut block, I guess you'd call it. And it was pretty difficult to get this mold off the first time. I got a little frustrated when the silicone ripped along the top farther than I wanted it to. I thought I had ruined the mold, but it ended up working still, where I was able to put it back in the jacket and get it to seal up fairly nicely. But as you can see here, you just pop the eyes out, gently pull around the teeth, get that removed from the mouth, and then it's free. I'm using 6-pound polyurethane expanding foam for this. My goal is to try to make hollow skulls, just like I make my hollow pumpkins. So we're going to see how this works. So anytime I'm doing foam, I try to get everything ready because you don't have a whole lot of working time. You have about 30 seconds to a minute before it starts to kick and foam. So I just pour equal parts of A and B, give it a good mix together, and dump it into the mold. And begin rotating the mold. I try to get good coating on the face. Getting it over the eyeballs was a little difficult because they protrude into the mold so far. And then once that is done, I just flip it over, give it a few minutes to sit and harden. And on this, I did do 2 coats of foam just to make it a little thicker this first time till I really see how the molding process is going to work on this. So now, this is a few minutes later, everything's hardened up. We're going to take the mold apart and see what we ended up with. And one thing about having this thing ripped the way it did, it made it really easy to get these skulls out. It doesn't take a whole lot to open up the silicone. When you get to the eyes and the mouth, you got to be careful. You got to pull the silicone out of the eyes and then gently pull it out of the mouth so you don't break your teeth off. And there it is. It actually turned out a lot better than I was expecting with the ripped mold. There wasn't much flashing on there. Overall, I was very happy with the way this turned out. I think we got a useful mold that'll make, 20 to 50 giant skulls for our projects. There were some issues on the silicone. One thing that I do not think I would do again for a mold this detailed and this size is use the Rebound 25. It's just too stiff of a silicone. I need something stretchier to be able to get it off. The way that I normally do it, I put this block down here so we can cut. What I should have done was taken that block, extended it all the way up to the top of the skull, so I could cut the entire thing where it ended up ripping. Plus, it's not as thick as I would normally like it to be. This ended up about a little over 1/8 of an inch. I usually shoot for about 1/4 of an inch thick. So it takes a little bit more time putting it back in the mold because you can see the two halves don't sit nicely together. So you just got to spend some time when you reconnect it back together. So it works, but could have been better. Next time it will be better. I do have some options to fix it. I could glue this silicone together and put more layers of silicone on top and then just remake the plaster bandage mold, which I may or may not do. I might just use it until it falls apart and then make another one. Because one thing with the 3D printed skulls is I'll always have it. It's really easy to make another mold. A little expensive, but you know, it's Halloween. And also, I don't know if you guys noticed, but during this video, I was in the process of changing cameras and also redoing this background behind me. So there's a lot of different color variations in the video. Now I have some dedicated cameras instead of using my phone. So hopefully the videos from now on will be better quality, be more enjoyable to watch. But thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying my content. We'll see you on the next one.